Okay, I see a hand. Yes, the ideal in the center and common depictions of Jesus. In the center of what?
It was
the last picture?
No, not, it was, pardon me, Susan Shapiro, I was the one who put the comment in that picture where you had the 5 races.
Yes, yes.
Looks like very common depictions, white people's depictions of Jesus.
Well, Jesus was white and so was Santa Claus, right? We are so crazy. Holy cow. Okay, so I'm happy to. It was long, and I'm sorry, but I hope you.
While I have the open mic, I just want to say thank you so very much for tying together so many aspects of Southern history. I'm a Yankee. I'm only 10 years in the South. So much of that, despite a lot of reading, much of that tying it together was really helpful to me. So thank you.
Good. I'm going to be interested to see what John Jurasek has to say, because he's a real historian and he knows this stuff. So I did. It was really quite enjoyable. I'm going to do an Ollie, I think, put on an Ollie lecture and kind of break this into 4 areas to talk about, because there's really lots of extra stuff that could be put in.
And just a note, those who would like to make a comment or ask a question, click on the participants list and click on the blue hand at the bottom, and that will signal that you want to make a question or comment. So that's the best way of getting attention, is to do a Zoom raise hand.
Catherine Mitchell.
Yes, this was great. I will confess, strong roots throughout the fine state of Mississippi. And I was raised by parents that were card-carrying liberals, to the point that my father was even subjected to threats of accused, well, he was accused of being a communist for his activities. So I know a bit about this, but the civil rights was still meeting. I moved out of Memphis, where I grew up, to Atlanta in 1964, and the Ku Klux Klan was still meeting on Stone Mountain and burning crosses. I don't think they ever really went that inactive, unfortunately.
Well, you know, the whole thing with the KKK, I've seen information that said that they used to make the police officers join the KKK. It was their kind of a benevolent association for them. And I think some of the brutality that we see and the attitudes would certainly kind of fit that they got it from somewhere.
Yeah.
Carol Hahn, oh, wait, somebody else had their hand. Wait, I don't see it now. Carol Hahn. Are you muted? Yeah, you are. Carol, unmute yourself.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, now?
Yeah,
I
hear you. Well, now it's off again. Yeah, no, it's off now. You unmuted, now you're mute again.
It keeps changing. Okay. That I understand that all of the monuments at the state capitol, around the state capitol building, and everybody who's been down there and ever seen them, that all of them, except the recent one of King, that they're all to Confederate, to the Confederate generals, all part of the lost cause.
Right.
And
right.
I was thinking, and that also that it was just 2 years ago that our state legislature passed a law to protect the monuments.
Oh yeah, they do that. All the state legislatures. It's all the thing these days.
It's
the way
right here, and it's difficult. And then the third point I wanted to was in this May, when I was walking a lot in the Decatur Cemetery, and on one day saw the ladies out there putting flowers on graves and flags, and it was the daughters of the Confederate.
The daughters, yeah, they took down the monument in Decatur Square.
Yes, but the cemetery has apparently quite a few graves.
Yes,
and
well,
those daughters are still
you gotta let the cemeteries
right active here.
Right, you got to let the cemeteries and the battlefields, that's okay. It's the public public land and right out there for everybody. Let's, Les Real.
Hi. Well, I don't, am I unmuted? Yes. That was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to make one comment about, since you raised them and showed slides, about Morton and the use of biology to support racism.
About
Racism.
what?
What Morton did, and
Oh, Morton. Yeah, Morton. Yeah.
Important to point out, there's been a reanalysis of Morton's data and a reanalysis of his methodology. And what was interesting about Morton is that
Morton's the guy that put the shot or the siege or whatever he used, the beans in the cranium, in the.
well, he put the shot. So he filled up the cranium with lead shot, and then
Right.
he would weigh the lead shot. And
Right.
but the problem is that Morton used different sizes of lead shot for different races.
Oh,
Oh,
So what that amounts to is more air, more interstitial space if you're using large shots. So
right,
he used
right.
large shot when he measured black skulls and very small shot when he used white skulls. So if
Well,
you actually repeat all those, and Stephen Jay Gould did that at the museum at Harvard, there's no differences in brain capacity. So Morton, and it's not clear that Morton did this as consciously.
No, they didn't. But they already knew what results they expected. You know, that was the thing. So
warning to take from this, since you presented it, I wanted to make sure that people didn't walk away thinking that black skulls were.
Oh no, that's a very good point. Thank you for that. This was part of my the white people and the myth of race talk that I gave a couple of years ago. So I just can't stay away from this stuff. What am I going to do? Sally Freeman, you've had your hand up since the very beginning. I'm skipping over Donald Stein. You're next.
Oh, hi. Thank you. That was a great talk, Marilyn. I appreciate it. It's nice to see somebody else who's been dragged down the same rabbit hole I've been dragged down. So
yes, Google will do that for you.
We should talk about this sometime. When I retired from Emory, I moved to Richmond, Virginia, and I lived maybe just a couple of miles from the headquarters of the United Daughters of the Confederacy, a little building that's located between the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts and the Virginia Museum of History on a prominent boulevard there. And
Arthur Ashe. They're on
Arthur Ashe Boulevard. So when all the rioting and statue removal occurred, the UDC headquarters was burned and the outside was covered with graffiti. So they boarded it up and they've gotten rid of the graffiti, but the two cannons that date back, they're Union cannons that were captured in Petersburg during the war, those two cannons still sit outside the UDC headquarters, which just makes me wonder what's next. You know, there's just been no change of whatever.
But it's interesting that somebody knew who they were. Because they really were influential, weren't they? I mean, when you think about them working on the school, and nobody knew. Hey, they're just ladies, you know.
Oh, right. I mean, I didn't know it. I grew up with it. You know, somebody said you ought to join the United Daughters of the Confederacy, and I didn't do it, but it was just one of those things. But it just that little building sits there, but now it still has.
I didn't know that. Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, Stein, you're up.
Hi, it was a fascinating talk, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about maybe Emory's role in the early days, because I remember when I came here as a member of the faculty and in administration at Emory, the fraternities and sororities used to have these Confederate parties where they'd all dress up as Confederate soldiers, and the girls would dress up as Confederate belles.
That would have been Kappa Alpha, the Southern Gentleman.
In 1995.
Yeah, well, the Kappa Alpha always did do the Southern thing. But the worst was, I think, not with the sororities and fraternities, but Paula Dean really came in for it. The cook and maven of cookbooks and the rest wanted to or maybe did put on a Confederate wedding, a plantation wedding, and one hired black fellows to put on uniforms to stand around the edge and serve. And people found that distasteful, perhaps inappropriate in this day and time.
Yeah, it is. I agree with you. You know, if I could tell one anecdotal story about my introduction to Emory when I came here in '95, I came here as dean of the graduate school at the time, and I had to go to a trustees meeting, one of my first trustees meetings. And I remember at that time, the trustees had a procedure where they would, the new ones would be inducted and the old ones would be able to give a few words of wisdom to as they departed. And one of the trustees was pointing out how we really have to remember our Southern roots, and it's really important as we go forward ahead. I'm all for that, but we always have to remember our Southern roots, and we have to be ever vigilant with his finger waving in the air about all these New York Northern influences coming down here telling us how to run things. So I think that Reconstruction and that anti-Reconstruction may not have died in the early 20s or 30s.
Well, it was complicated, wasn't it? Who knew? For a while, there was a golden time. There was a lovely time when they could vote, all kinds of things. That's why I say it's a wonder we haven't all had our throats cut in our sleep. Anybody white. I think it shows admirable restraint on the part of the African-American population. Ron Abercrombie.
Oh, I just wanted to add my thank you. And you said at the end that anyone could do that talk like you. That's absolutely false. No one could have done a talk like you have done. You also said something which was that, and it's true and disturbing, which is a lot of these ideas of racism are baked in.
Yeah.
And you heard that with comments from other people today. This was not the topic of your talk, but that's a disturbing reality. And I don't know, do you have something to say? How
Oh, well, we're working on it all the time. I think naming it, recognizing it, realizing that we're doing this, I think is the first step. And knowing that we're not going to get it right, but that it's important to keep trying and call out white supremacy and racism where you see it, if you can, and you don't have to be nice to everybody. That's never worried me too much. Jamail Zainaldin. We need.
Hello.
Oh, yeah.
I am a historian. I'm a Southern historian a little bit, but I wanted to say I just loved your presentation. I want to encourage you to continue speaking to public audiences. My brothers and sisters in professional history, God bless them, know an awful lot. And because they know so many things, and because they spend important time communicating with each other about what is important here and what is important there in the latest research, we sometimes forget to know how to talk to the public. And I think you have done a beautiful job of absorbing scholarship and of presenting it. And I think maybe the most...
Uh-oh, you're frozen. Have I lost you or have I lost every? Oh, there you go. You're back. Good.
Yeah, and you've presented it in a very coherent way. And I think it's very important.
Good, thank you. I was not sure because boy, I was putting together bits and pieces and patching. And I said, do it chronologically. They can't go wrong with
I think that is I think doing it chronologically is a very logical way to do it. And also you've really focused on the essentials, but I just want to thank you. I think you need to do as much of this as you can right now.
Thank you. I love it. I do enjoy it. That's kind of, like I say, it's a seminar in your head, but it is fun to, we can do this. We are trained to think. We're critical thinkers. We're,
Let's see if they're going to let me talk. I don't know where they are.
Liza, you got your hand up.
And yes, let me add my thanks to Marilyn. That was lovely and very informative. I wanted to comment on the period, the golden period, when a lot of freedmen were able to vote. I don't know if you've ever watched a show called Finding Your Roots.
Yes, I've heard of it, but I have not seen it. Yeah.
It's Henry Louis Gates interviewing
Yes.
various people and then creating their ancestry. But he interviewed John Lewis and discovered, he and his crew discovered in the process of researching Lewis's ancestry that one of his ancestors had been able to vote during that period.
Oh, wonderful.
Henry Louis Gates mentioned this, and John Lewis just started crying.
Oh, I'm sure.
It was such a moving moment. So I wanted to add that because
thank you. That's really sweet.
But
good. I'm glad he got his mural. I want Denise. Gretchen's going to cut me off.
Yeah, right. I loved this talk. It was really fun for me. The parts that were particularly illuminating was all the stuff about the daughters, right? The important women and how it, and in detail, and the timeline, and then that great graphic of when the monuments were being put up. And because I think that tells a tale that many people have been saying, well, wait, you guys, they weren't part of any post-Civil War thing. They actually came much later, and they were about cementing white redemption and the end of Reconstruction. And of course, I'm going to say, now that all these people have said to you, you should keep going with this, I look so forward to working out the details for when you're going to do your
because I do want to do an Ollie. I think it's perfect for it. I mean, the different categories for each time, and you could go into it in depth and give people reading to do. You can't get any of the books out of the library because I've got them all.
But I would also say that, as others have said, everybody can do this. I mean, I'm an OBGYN, and I've done a lot of deep diving into all this history since I left. I knew some of it before, but there's lots of stuff. And what's really important to understand is that the early history's early approach was all mediated from the perspective of white historians saying, well, Black people didn't have anything to say because they were illiterate and so on and so forth. And no one went to look for the sources. So, when you look at Eric Foner, and what he does, he unearths all these petitions during Reconstruction from Black groups and the political meetings they had and how they tried to organize. And so there really has been a lot of new information that has come to us from people delving into source material that had either ignored or wasn't developed early on.
It is. It's always so surprising you get the rest of the story, if you will. Oh, here Jan Pratt has been a scholar. And if you look on chat, she knows who the statues on the Georgia State House grounds are.
Oh, great.
This was one of the questions, is whether or not you should put plaques on statues to explain them, to give them some kind of, ground them in their time, if you will. But when you really think about it, if you've got a statue that's as big as a real horse, and you've got a plaque that's the size of your hand, people are really not going to read it. They're not going to pay attention to it. And I think when you really get into, I didn't believe that you could look at a statue and say, this is a white supremacist, but now I do. I really think by going back and realizing the history and how people were treated, what all has happened and changed, there's no doubt about it. And I think that's not, if we're going to try to make a change in this, we're going to have to try harder. Oh, Gretchen.
Gretchen's on wrap up.
Well, yes and no. I mean, we do wrap up at 1 o'clock routinely on these occasions, but also routine has become willingness of speakers. I'm sure Marilyn will be willing to hang around and continue to
Sure.
talk with people who want to talk. And I did just want to say what's been mentioned already by Denise and others. Those of us really interested in this and newly aware of the wonderfulness of Marilyn's teaching capacity can sign on for whatever sort of OLLI offering decide to present. We'll let you know about that through the newsletter and otherwise. But I agree about how terrific this has been, Marilyn, and you all can see why we've had her talk at least once a year for the last 4 or 5 years, right? This is the 4th time we've had her.
Yeah.
And
Sherlock Holmes and white people and sunscreens. Yeah.
Quite a variety, right? And always terrific, always wonderful. Thank you. And if people need to go, go. But if you can hang around, please do.
And don't forget next week, wear flowers.
Right.
That's right. We really want to emphasize how special that occasion, Rosemary talking to us, is going to be. And
is Holly still here with her flowers? Yeah, there she is. Holly York, wave your hand.
Yeah, Holly's been playing.
This is what we want to see for everybody.
Yeah.
Close your closet door, dear. Oh, there you go. And the fascinator. That's what you want. Nice.
Yeah, if you can bedeck your
oh,
space,
they're beautiful. Woo!
Or bedeck yourself. Look at Holly and make it special for Rosemary. That's what we would really like people to do, especially floral motifs. Anyway, Holly, you want to speak?
I was just going to say, these flowers, some of them may not actually have grown out of the ground. So you don't have to have flowers. I don't have.
No, say it's not so, you Southern Belle.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you, John.
All right. Let me just join the praise for your talk. I'm a historian. And,
yes, I know, and going to review it too.
Well, the review is going to be very positive. I mean, the talk could have been made by a professional historian. It was.
Oh yeah! Wow.
You hit the right spots, and there were no significant errors. I learned a great deal personally from this, especially about the United Daughters of the Confederacy. But let me just contribute a couple tidbits on the monument and Confederacy issues. I live on East Lake Road. I'm sure you've all driven on East Lake Road toward the East Lake MARTA station or otherwise. Anyway, there is a monument on East Lake Road. Down where East Lake Road joins Ponce de Leon Avenue, you've all been there, right across from the park. When you're on East Lake, on the right side of the road, there is a small monument which informs you that you're on the Jeff Davis Highway.
I know about that. Are you interested? I can tell you about the Jeff Davis Highway. And that's the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And they put in the Lincoln Highway up north. And this was around 1930 or so, and maybe in the late 20s. And she said to her brother, well, they put in the Lincoln Highway. It should be nice to have the Jefferson Davis Highway in the South. And he said, well, all you have to do is write to the transportation department and ask for it and see what can be done and see if you can get it strung together somehow. Well, it turned out they did. And it was just at the time where the highways were getting numbers instead of getting these names, these descriptive trails. They used to have trails, they'd call them. And so it only got to be the Jefferson Davis Highway for a little while. And then it became, gosh, it's got Highway 10, Highway 1, I can't remember now the numbers, 60, anyway, as it goes across. It also goes from Washington down to where Jefferson Davis's house was. Anyway, they found, the reason I know about it is because they found what they thought looked like headstones from a cemetery out in New Mexico. One was by a service station, and somebody said, "What is this?" It says it's the Jefferson Davis Highway. And so they looked it up to see what it was, and they said, "Well, we don't know anything about this. We think we'll just take them down." And they did, but it was very screwy, and it never really got to be named that or in particular. But yes, the daughters saw their chance. If you've got a Lincoln, you've got to have a Jeff Davis.
Yeah. One more thing about Emory. I came to Emory in the fall of '66, newly hired instructor in the history department. Of course, I was the lowest ranking on the totem pole, so I had this office in the basement of the history building. And this was, I don't know, maybe a month after I started work there. I was just getting moved into my little closet-sized office. And I heard all this commotion and what sounded like gunshots. And so I went down the hall and up the steps to check out what was happening on the quadrangle. Clearly something was happening on the quadrangle. And as I emerged, I saw people galloping by on horses dressed in Confederate uniforms, waving their sabers and firing pistols. And it was the KA doing an unusually elaborate thing that they did. I don't know what day it was. What day is Confederate Memorial Day?
Well, it depends. Depends on what state you're in. Depends on what you want to. And sometimes it's Jeff Davis's birthday. Sometimes it's Robert E. Lee's birthday. And sometimes it's just whenever you damn want it. Usually it's in the spring so that you have buds and flowers to put on the graves. But yeah, it varies. It varies. And some of the really nasty states have it the same day as Martin Luther King Day. If they're particularly prickly and stubborn.
Anyway.
Oh, there. I see another hand. Bill and Pat Graves, one of you, yeah.
While we're unloading on the KAs, when I was an undergraduate at Birmingham Southern, they always put up the Confederate flag on the school flagpole on Robert E. Lee's birthday, and challenged anybody to try to take it down. But one year, one of my fraternity brothers went up on the building next to it and he was taking a course in archery and shot it with a flaming arrow and burned it right off the pole.
What fraternity were you in, you rascal?
ATO, which was
you were an ATO?
Which was founded after the Civil War and was dedicated to reconciliation idea.
I think that the ATOs are the hairy-chested men. Am I right? Is that? Are the ATOs? I recall them being called the hairy-chested men. Is that?
Not in my chapter. But I want to make one other thing. You mentioned Silent Sam early in the talk and attributed him to Duke, but he's actually at UNC.
Oh, he's the one. So I get them mixed up, and I'm sorry to say, I totally.
Well, as a UNC alum, I just say that Duke's welcome to him. So.
Yes, and they were
the Duke alum. I would say we do not want him.
No. He's not. Yeah, no. But literally, the university came up with $2.5 million for the care and keeping of Silent Sam, as long as he was taken away from any building that had anything to do with the university. They didn't want to see him again. They didn't want to deal with it. And they would administrate the money. They didn't just give it to the motorcycle riders. But then, there was outrage, especially the history department. That's where Blight and some others, other people wrote it, and they said, good God, what have you done? That's more than the budget of the entire history department for, 10 years, I don't know what. And so it went up for a countersuit, and it was settled, and the guys lost out. They said, we don't really think that you don't have a horse in this race. So good. But here's, I was going to tell you, what they do is, so the legislatures say, no, 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 no touching monuments, no touching anything. You can't do it. You can't do it. Well, you can if you ask and you do a bunch of other stuff. But you can if it is dangerous. If it is for some reason that the students might get hurt, somebody might be. That's how they got the Decatur Square monument down, because it was near the street, and you didn't want somebody who was busy defacing the monument to get run over. So they were defacing it at such a regular, on such a regular basis, that they decided that they better, it was like an attractive nuisance. And that's what the statues become. And there are lots of ways you can do it. It cost Mitch Landrieu in New Orleans, it cost him $2.1 million to get those 4 statues out of the Confederates, out of that square. And I don't know what Richmond's going to cost. It may still be in litigation.
Tiny Westbrook has her hand up.
Oh, yeah, Viola. You're muted. You're muted, baby.
Still muted.
There you go.
Well, okay. First of all, thank you, Marilyn. It was just fascinating, and to see it sort of lined out, over the years chronically. That was, I think, very, very helpful to a lot of, I'm sure, to me. I thought maybe you might be interested. You've probably seen the article in the Atlantic looking for Frederick Douglass and talking about his birthplace. There at the State House, the square, there are 2 statues. There's one of Frederick Douglass, and on the other side, there's one Confederate Memorial to the Talbot boys. And they're standing basically, very close to each other. Now, of course, the Talbot boys have been there since the Confederates, Daughters of Confederacy have put it up, probably somewhere, I forgot, about the 30s or something. And Frederick Douglass's statue has only been up a few years. I think it was put up in 2004.
Right.
So, but they're standing now side by side. And, there's an irony in that, of course. And I think this whole Daughters of Confederate movement of putting up statues 50 years and more after the war is been such a wrong-headed idea in the first place.
Yes.
But here they are, and they're not helping the memory at all. And while I'm on that, I have one question that's bothered me in all this. I think a lot, first of all, soldiers coming home from the Civil War, most of them were not plantation owners. They didn't own slaves themselves. No. And a lot of them fought because they had to. They were conscripted, or I don't know what.
Right.
And they came home to the same destruction. But I think to sort of lump them all into the same thing, I'm sure that most of the sometimes very simple people didn't know very much.
No.
And they weren't fighting for slavery. I don't think.
They were not fighting for slavery. They were fighting. Some of them were fighting because they love to fight, because there's that strain in Southerners.
We had that in America, but then a lot of them are fighting for their buddies, and a lot of them are fighting for their soil or their home. And we sort of love them all into one traitorous lump. And I think
one thing was, when they came back, one thing that was a problem was the fact that the freed slaves, they had made provisions to take care of them, and that upset people a lot because they also were needy. They didn't have anything, and
Well,
so they all this it's like affirmative action even worse, and it
and
caused a lot of
from then on, you've got that conflict, right? It
yes.
was sort of superimposed almost over,
Right.
over what originally happened. But anyway, it's bothered me a little bit that these are all now traitors, you know, from the time that they entered the war.
Right.
And
right.
I think that's anyway.
Well, you know that Lincoln did not consider them traitors. He was you had to sign, you had to give an oath, you had to give up certain things.
Sure.
But he said that secession was not legal. Therefore,
right.
They were never gone. They are welcomed back because we didn't let them go. And
you know, and that point wasn't, you know, was sort of lost, of course, in all of that bitter acrimony after.
Yes. Well, right? I was shocked. I mean, I read a whole lot of stuff before I said, wait a minute, what the hell? The Confederates got forgiven? I didn't know that. And, you know, I don't think people do. I think that's a confusion.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, thanks again.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Thanks again. Good to see you.
One thing I think that is interesting is how in some ways it seems like the Civil War is still being fought, but the Civil War in some ways is not that long ago. For example, the last Civil War veteran widow just died within the past year. And which if you think about it is pretty astounding.
Yes.
But the other thing is when Marge and I went to Gettysburg Battlefield in the early 80s, there was an option of being able to take a tour with some person who would lead you around personally. And the person who took us around was quite elderly, and he told us stories of years ago taking around veterans of the Gettysburg War, both Union and Confederate, together and leading them around the battlefield. And so, you know, that just sort of illustrates that in some way the war is not that long ago, and unfortunately I think it tends to be kept in memory, as we see all too much, as if it were fought yesterday.
Well, and artificially inflamed, sort of, right? When you think you take these two different soldiers from the different sides jointly going on Gettysburg, and then you know, what comes afterwards is so artificially inflamed, but it's so deep by now.
Well, maybe the other aspect of it, though, is remember that they were foot soldiers, and I think we're just glad to quit fighting. We have had other times when soldiers have gotten together. The famous one on Christmas Eve, when the Germans and the Americans played soccer across the field. I think sometimes they're just tired. They're just ready to just give it up. And what's bad is when you have the lost cause goes, it becomes an ad hominem argument that we didn't win, but we will not accept that because we're the noblest, and we always can say that we did the right thing. But they didn't do the right thing exactly, but you know, they praise themselves quite a lot in the lost cause, in that myth, that cult, the cult of the lost cause.
Well, I recently read an article that I thought was very persuasive, but John, being an expert, may be able to speak to that. But the idea is that if you look at those who were pushing for secession and pushing for the maintenance of slavery, it was really the top 1% of the South.
Oh, yes.
The top 0.1% of the South.
John will know.
That had all of the wealth, and it was to their great benefit to maintain slavery, and not lots of people from the rural areas and so forth. And so it was really a lot of people being duped by the ultra elites. And it's sort of the same thing I think we see to some extent in our country now in terms of who is actually running the government.
Well, that was sort of my point too.
I don't know about the percentage of the Southern elites that promoted the war, but it certainly was a tiny elite. But it shouldn't be forgotten that all kinds of Southerners who didn't have slaves, probably didn't want slaves around, nevertheless followed along. And I think they followed along, not necessarily for the reasons we think. I think the kind of thing that would have happened in the South was the kind of thing that Northerners were worried about as the Great Migration came, as school integration came to New England towns. I mean, there was an enormous amount of resistance because of racial prejudice. And, you know, Southerners, no matter how, what their status in life, I mean, shared that, maybe even to a greater extent than Northerners. And they would have been worried about the end of slavery because all of a sudden, all those blacks would have been released from their bonds.
Oh, they were.
And they would have been all over the neighborhoods and, you know, competing for everything. And they didn't want to see that. And so it may have been very unfortunate that slavery existed, and it may have been very antagonizing that these few rich guys were the main beneficiaries of the whole thing. But nevertheless, they went along with it because of how they felt about blacks.
That's right. That's right. I think a lot of them died afterwards because they, especially if they were out there where Sherman wanted them, where everything had been pretty much blasted away, and there weren't medicines. There were, if you really had rules like Mississippi where you couldn't hunt, you couldn't do things, you couldn't handle yourself on your own. It was, you were damned if you did and damned if you didn't, you know, it was just a terrible situation.
Yeah. And let me just say about something about Lincoln and reconciliation. I mean, reconciliation was an inherently desirable thing.
Sure.
So that we didn't have a situation like afflicted Northern Ireland, you know, endless fighting, you know, over the old causes. And nevertheless, Andrew Johnson went too far too fast.
Wasn't he horrid? I was just shocked.
Right. But he had the Lincoln cover.
Yes.
You know, Lincoln wanted reconciliation. Well, I'm just following along with my predecessor. Anyway, all of those Southern soldiers were guilty of treason. Technically, legally guilty of treason. And the United States is a place where our Constitution makes it very difficult to be accused of treason and much less convicted of it, because it requires that you actually take up arms against the United States of America. Well, hardly anybody does that except, you know, Germans and Japanese in World War II. But all the Confederates did. They were all technically guilty of treason. They could have been, there could have been mass executions.
Sure, absolutely.
Had the letter of the law been followed.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, there were all these amnesties, and you know, even before formal amnesties, there were other things that you know, prevented what would have looked like you know, continuation of the war, even under worse circumstances where women and children would have been killed. And but anyway, it wasn't a complete expunging of the treason thing. There was one Confederate officer who was executed for treason.
It was
his name.
Andersonville, the guy at Andersonville.
He was the commandant of Andersonville prison camp, this terrible place.
Damn, did I read. Andersonville looks like a fabulous place to visit, by the way. Really interesting.
It is awful. It's a very small, few acres.
Yeah.
They have tens of thousands of prisoners in there, afflicting each other in all kinds of ways. It was terrible. And
well, wasn't most of the war fought on Southern soil?
Oh yes. I
yeah.
mean,
So I mean, they were already they were punished. I've got another question. Let me hold that thought, John. I've got Denise with her hand up, being mannerly. I can't make it go down. Okay.
Yeah. So, just in terms of actually 2 points now. I think as the war proceeded, first they thought it was going to be like 6 months and the whole thing would be over. But increasingly for Confederates, they literally were fighting for their land.
Yes.
Because the war happened on their turf.
Yes.
It was their farms and their properties that were being destroyed. And so to some extent, they did have a feeling that I have to preserve my way of life because I got my farm and now my wife and my family that I have to fight for. And then on the treason front, I agree. There's no question that if you were a Confederate and you were shooting at Union soldiers, you are a traitor. That's like the definition of treason.
Right.
However, there is nothing that says you cannot grant amnesty or pardons to traitors, right? And so that was the process.
That was the amnesty. That's right. But they were in the same situation as the. I got the idea that the Germans were in when they said, "Well, we're not going to hire any Nazis," or no, they can't come back and have the jobs they had before because they were Nazis, and then there was nobody to work. There's nobody to run the trains. There was nobody to teach the schools, so they had to say, well, maybe
but that's a different position because the Nazis were the government.
Yes.
It's not like you're punishing traitors.
No, but they did let back the legislators.
Yes, because the skills in the population were embedded in the people who were the previous administration.
Right. But when they let them be legislators again, then they were in a position to make life very, very hard for the ex-slaves. If you were a racist in a legislature later, you were in the catbird seat.
Yeah, sorry, I thought we were still talking about Nazis.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no. You always pull out the Nazi argument when your argument's getting thin. That's the
right. But I think because if you look at that Germany as an example, what you also see is a lot of collusion with the Allies. Because obviously all the people who ran industry and the big corporations in Germany were all Nazis and generated, used labor, et cetera, et cetera. But again, they found that those resources were absolutely essential to rebuilding the economy. Similarly, what was so critical for the South after the war was to regenerate the cotton crop. Because the cotton was the driver of both Northern and Southern economy. And so one of the things you see is that as slaves mostly migrated to towns and cities, primarily looking for the pieces of their family.
Right.
There were orders that basically said, y'all got to go back to the countryside and you got to work, right? And that was the basis of the Freedmen's Bureau's emphasis on work contracts. Everybody's got to work because y'all got to get in the field and grow cotton. And the freedmen would say, I want to grow corn and okra and stuff for they'd be like, nope, you got to be doing cotton. So it was in the interest, in the economic interest of both the North and the South to drive Black people back to the countryside and into the fields. And you have to consider that because economics was the larger driver of many of the development of these things, and obviously slavery and the economic support of slavery, that economics again was the main driver to how Reconstruction and then white redemption evolved.
Right. I didn't read about any of that. I just read. I walk a very narrow line. There's nothing on either side.